All right, hello everybody, welcome. My name is Shaina and I'm an astrologer, and today we are continuing my aspect series. I will link my aspect series playlist in the card if you're curious. Card? I don't know. And yes, it's the same background. I was actually supposed to be moving this week, but you know how moving goes, things change around a lot. So we're just hanging with it. I was like, oh my God, I have time to film a video today, so we're doing it. Anyway, so this is a big one actually, Mars opposite Saturn. Many of you guys know I have this aspect. It's at a really tight orb. It's only 5 minutes different. Okay, well, hold on, rewind. Before I get to, dive headfirst in this video, let me just get some advertising out of the way. So I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. All my links are always linked down below, by the way, if you didn't know that. I also have a TikTok at shaina.emily, and I have a backup account at shaina.emily backup. Some people don't know if it's my actual account or not because I have so many fake people. That one is my account as well because it's linked in my bio. So those are my only 2 accounts. That's why they're linked in the bios of each other. As you guys know, I do these videos by basically audience request only, which, by the way, if you have any aspect requests, you can always put them in the comments. And I have my little Google Doc. I save them and then I put them all into my Google Doc, and then I post the poll onto my community tab on my YouTube channel. I post the top 4 that get the most votes on the poll, and whichever one of those 4 wins. And they're all usually really close in votes. Like, they're all like maybe only 1 or 2 away from each other, right? Maybe there's a tie and I'll use random number generator to break the tie. But Mars opposite Saturn has been one that has not only for the last like 3 or 4 times, I feel like, won as the most requested aspect. It actually has double the amount as the second most requested aspect. So it's like lapped the competition, literally. And for some reason, it just does not win on the poll, which is really funny. And I was like, that is the most just perfect summary and example of Mars opposite Saturn, truly. Like, it is going to go above and beyond expectations, right? Getting double the amount of votes than the second most voted on aspect. But then when it all counts on it, it loses the popularity contest of the YouTube community poll. Like, that is Mars opposite Saturn, I feel like. And also the obstruction, right? Like, oh, it should win, but constantly getting like obstructed. So I randomly had enough time to do a video and I was like, I need to just write it now. It needs to be one that I know, right? And I know Mars opposite Saturn. Justice for Mars opposite Saturn. I'm going to, I guess, kind of like Mars opposite Saturn, it'd be like, I am my only authority. I can do what I want. Again, very Mars opposite Saturn, and do the aspect. The next one I do will be the one that you guys vote on. But yeah, let's get into it. So if you do not know what Mars represents in astrology, I have a video all about Mars. I'll link it up in the cards. It's the inner planets. You can skip to the timestamp that says Mars. And if you do not know what Saturn represents in astrology, I have another video about the outer planets. If I'm able to, I'll link that one in the cards as well. You can skip to the part that says Saturn. And if you do not know what an opposition is in astrology, I already have a whole video about aspects in astrology, and you can skip to the part that talks about opposition. So we can skip all that and we can get right into the meat of this video, which is Mars opposite Saturn. So if you know about astrology, you know that this is a big aspect. Why is it a big aspect? Because it's between 2 very strong malefic energies. And those 2 malefic energies, the rulers of those signs naturally square, right? Aries squares Capricorn, okay? You know what? They both square because I never thought about this. I'm just realizing this now, ding, ding, ding. The co-ruler of Mars is Scorpio. The co-ruler of Saturn is Aquarius, and those actually square too, which is really interesting. And then the opposing one's sextile. So that's also really interesting, right? Scorpio, Capricorn, sextile, Aquarius, Aries, sextile. They're both kind of very outer directed, pride directed energies in different ways. But yeah, it's in different ways. They go about it in different ways. Their energy's different. Their strategy's different, right? That's that square. So the sextile is there. They're both malefics, right? They both bring distress and harshness, whatever, I don't know, to wherever they land. But there are also some serious energies you don't want to fuck with. But yeah, they're being fucked with in this one. But yeah, this is just like a very strong aspect, I think. I know I have it very prominently in my chart. It splits it in half. So it's like one of my biggest aspects. But even if it's in like a loose opposition to where it's like, 9-degree orb, even if you have it amongst other oppositions and you're like, oh, does it kind of hide in the background? I don't think so. I think it's just one of those aspects that the person, that the native feels very prominently. Obviously, I guess we can get into like, people have like trauma competitions. We can get into the Mars opposite Saturn competition, in which case I would win. And I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm just rambling now. Woo, getting off topic. Okay. Anyways, let me focus here. So this is a big aspect, is what I'm trying to say. So if you have this aspect, sound off in the comments. And I would love to know your experience with it as well, out of curiosity. What sign is it in? What house is it in? That kind of stuff. I'm going to break this down kind of like topic by topic. I've said this for a while now, but my little thing that I've always said for Mars opposite Saturn is like taking 3 steps forward, 2 steps backwards. And then you trip, and then you fall off a cliff, and then a piano lands on top of you. That's like Mars opposite Saturn is how it feels. But that's just me being like a victim, right? But that's just like, that's and something about the piano feels right. Like, I don't know. So it can feel like as the Mars opposite Saturn native, it can feel like everything you do, right? Mars, it's action, right? Everything you do gets impeded. Something impedes you or stops you, Saturn, from getting what you want. Okay, Saturn is like the brick wall. In opposition, I think, only strengthens that wall, right? Like they took the Berlin Wall down, but it didn't happen in a day. That's like, I don't know, Mars opposite Saturn, right? Like you can get past these roadblocks that come up in you trying to get what you want, but it can feel sometimes a little insurmountable, or just one notch below insurmountable, really, is usually, I think, what it feels like, to where it's like, well, it is possible, so I can't make an excuse, but this sucks. It can also feel like you have to work 10 times harder to achieve the same results as other people. So what I always say is sometimes this can be as big as, like just to get straight A's, it feels like you have to work 10 times harder. But sometimes it can be as small, I think, in my opinion, as getting money out of an ATM, right? Like for somebody without Mars opposite Saturn, they just go and get money out of the ATM. But it can really feel like with somebody with Mars opposite Saturn, you go to an ATM. And yes, this is by personal experience. This one time it was like, and when I lived in LA, it was like always a thing. I was like, what? This shouldn't be that hard. It was like, I go to one ATM, that ATM would be closed. I go to the other one, that one just got stolen money out of. So now it's all messed up and I can't use it. Like, and then I can't park somewhere else. Like, and then I'd get there and then it'd be like, oh, there'd be an issue. Like, right, like it just felt like, oh, why is this so much harder for me? It could feel like that, even just with sometimes little mundane things, sometimes really big giant accomplishments as well. And I always say, like, all Mars Saturn aspects denote hard work, right? It's just that what that aspect is, whether it's a square, opposition, sextile, trine, conjunction, inconjunct, whatever, right? Like whatever aspect it is denotes how much friction there will be, the kind of friction, the kind of support or the lack of support that you'll receive. And also Mars opposite Saturn, and I think Mars square Saturn might feel this too. It can feel like sometimes the hard work is more work than it's worth. Yes, there are accomplishments, but my God, those accomplishments do not fit the amount of energy or effort or time that I had to put into it, right? Actually, conjunct would probably be like, the output and the hard work that I put into it is equal to the results and accomplishments I receive. The trine would be, I put in some hard work and wow, I receive actually quite a bit of accomplishment. Okay, good. Yeah, this made it worth it, right? So that can be frustrating, and that's like a big thing about Mars opposite Saturn, is that it's a real, this is why I'm sure you guys have heard me say this before, that I work harder, not smarter. This is the aspect, in my opinion, that is why I think I do that. there's just something about this aspect that it's so used to taking on everything with a challenge attached, you know, and maybe you've heard me say this before, somebody say this before, this is not something I've come up with myself, but it's like everything that they take on has to have a challenge attached, and if there's not, it's almost like they don't want it, or they have to tack a challenge on top of it. It's like nothing worth doing is worth doing unless there's a challenge or goal or obstacle attached. So they're really good at making their life and their work, or whatever, you know, houses those planets are in, they're really good at making those houses harder than it needs to be a lot of times. And they'll go, oh no, I can justify it. But this is the opposition, guys. This isn't a trine or a sextile, so you can try to justify it all you want, but sometimes we really just put a lot of energy into things that just aren't worth it. Sometimes Mars opposite Saturn doesn't think things through in the right way, which I'll get into more later. It either thinks it through too much or too little, right? I also call Mars opposite Saturn one of those like hamster wheel aspects, where it feels like you're always like winding around your own little hamster wheel, where you're like exerting yourself and like giving out all this energy and time and effort, but this like doesn't go anywhere. It's a hamster wheel. It stays stagnant. And now I don't want you thinking, people are very like doom nation. I don't know why everyone's like, I'm more doomed than everyone else, you know? This is not like something to where it's like, you're going to be doing this forever. You're only going to be doing work that gets you nowhere. Like, this is an aspect that I think more than the majority of hard aspects, the point of this aspect is like, it creates somebody that is built to overcome challenges and overcome obstacles. So being given a big obstacle or challenge is not going to stop this aspect, because that's what it's built to do. So I feel like when operating at a really good, more mature, maybe after a Saturn return or two, you know, when at that function, or slowing down and thinking things through, you have an ability to really, really achieve what you want out of that house or those houses that these planets are in. You know, you just have to make sure that you're only listening to yourself and you aren't maybe being clouded by external circumstances or expectations like Saturn can tend to be, right? And it can feel like definitely people with this aspect have that like over planning attitude, right? And like, that's like, in a weird way, I think that's also like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, like, right? Like over planning and putting too much arduous effort and energy where you don't need to, you know, overpacking might be a common thing with this aspect, because it's like, things always go wrong is like what you're conditioned to believe with this aspect, right? Something that everybody else is like, I had no issue, like say moving. I had no issue moving. I have Mars opposite Saturn. I know that any issues that people report, there's, instead of like a 20% chance that that'll happen to me, I feel like there's probably an 80% chance that that'll happen to me. So there can be a real control sort of obsession energy with this aspect. This is not an aspect that creates, I should say this, this is not an aspect that creates a pleasant personality. Okay, this is not necessarily, I would say, an aspect that's like innately mean, but it does create like a really harsh, obtrusive, hard to get along with, hard to appease, very unappeasable and unimpressed personality with themselves and everyone around them. And it can feel like a very demanding energy, again, for themselves and everyone around them a lot. And there can be a real discouraging vibe to them as well. So it's not a very pleasant energy. It's not like it's something that is like, I think people confuse Saturn with Pluto a lot, and it really makes me upset when they do that, because Pluto will, like, I think be more purposefully damaging, if that makes sense, and try harder to affect their external surroundings. Whereas I feel like with Saturn aspects, it's more of like an effect rather than a cause. Whereas with Pluto, they can be more of the cause. Basically, to summarize what I was saying to get us back, you can feel like anything you want in life, anything you want to achieve or do, I don't know if this is true or not, but this is how it can feel. It takes an insurmountable uphill climb no matter how many precautions you take, how meticulously you plan things out, or how much thought you put into things. Now, let's talk about something that's odd to say, but this is an anomaly. I don't know if it might very easily just have to do with I'm getting on so many tangents. Wow, I knew this was going to be a long video, but there tends to be this chart type where people have like very harmonious charts, maybe lots of sextiles and conjunctions, but then they'll have like one square or a few squares or oppositions, but then those will be with Saturn. And a lot of times this is one of those that people will have that's very common, like a very harmonious chart, but then Mars square Saturn. Very harmonious chart, but then Mars opposite Saturn, maybe like one or two others, you know, in there, and it's usually with Saturn. And what I have found is that if this is your only harsh aspect or one of your few harsh aspects in your chart, you know, one of your few squares or oppositions or in conjunctions in your chart, right? I do think it's a little easy to sometimes succumb to it. I don't think you ever fully will, because that's the point of this aspect, is like the resiliency to that. Sometimes it is easier to succumb to and let it kind of stop you in your way. Let the insecurities get to you. Let the fear get to you that comes with this aspect. Because what happens is if you have all these sextiles and conjunctions in your chart, you can feel like the world aligns for you in every other way and things work out how they should. But then whenever you try to exert your want or your will or your goals onto the world, you know, Mars energy, it can feel like there are always all these things getting in your way, Saturn. And so there can be a quicker way to discouragement, because it can feel like everything else just comes with ease and comes how it should. The fact that this one thing, it's like taking me a few more tries, must be the world telling me that I'm going the wrong direction, or that I should just give up, or I don't want to do this anymore, it's too hard, or whatever the feeling or thought is, and throw in the towel. When in reality, you know, I feel like what helps with astrology is if you know you have this aspect, or just another Saturn aspect, honestly, like a square or an opposition, or maybe an inconjunction. But what you really need to see, and just in general, what everybody needs to see with this aspect, but especially these kinds of people, is that these are not things to stop you, but rather to help you grow and learn. You know, if things do come easy to you, this is to make sure and to check you and stop you, and this is to teach you and help you grow. It is to make you doubt yourself, but then to build yourself back up, right? It's not to make you succumb to it, it's meant to make you rise above and rise with it, right? So don't feel like the world is against you, or the world hates you, or doesn't want you to succeed. See it as, oh, that just might have been something that I needed to learn. And with Mars opposite Saturn, sometimes the thing that you need to learn is simply just rejection. In all honesty, there can be like a struggle, I think, with this aspect of going after your present needs in the here and now. There can be this like really high want for short-term validation with like Mars being there like quick, especially if it's in a more like fiery sign. Or there can be this like too much tendency towards the Saturn, which is, you know, only wanting or seeking pleasure way too far out in the long run, like being 20 years and being like, I can rest when I'm dead. Like, no, please enjoy your 20s. Please enjoy the moment. Please enjoy your 30s. Please enjoy your teens, like whatever it is, right? So I think Mars opposite Saturn does have troubles enjoying the day by day on the present moment. Maybe unless there's other energies like maybe Sagittarius energy in the chart to help with that, or fire energy, or Taurus energy can be grounding too to help with being in the present moment. But this aspect alone can do that sometimes. Also, my advice for people with Mars opposite Saturn is to not take the shortcut. I would definitely recommend sticking with more of like the safe route, or at least the route that you have a backup plan for. That doesn't mean don't take any risks, because with Mars opposite Saturn, I do think that risks can, any Mars Saturn aspect actually, I think risks can play out really well in the long run if they're calculated risks, right? But if you're like trying to weasel your way out of something, or like weasel your way out of a lesson, or the hard thing, or the hard way, Saturn will shit on you. Mars will destroy you. Like, I don't know. This can be a little bit like of the short end of the stick aspect, the aspect that, you know, does not get away with things that others do. I do also think that there is a tendency towards, you know, overwork, and Saturn does rule the bones, and Mars can overexert itself. So arthritis, I think, can be something that's common, or like anything that involves like overactivity in the body or underactivity, I feel like, as well. But I'm no doctor. I'm just just speculating a little bit with that one, I'll be honest. Also, another thing that makes this aspect embittered, I'm just kidding, is that this aspect feels like it has to be 100,000 times or percent better than everyone else to get half of the recognition that everyone else does. But I think a lot of that is also because of the standards that you set for yourself and the shit that you talk towards everyone else. So it's like, of course, you're going to be held to a different standard. Usually there's a very strong Saturnian figure or Saturnian authoritative figures that play out in your life. that placed a pretty strong or high expectation on you, especially in the areas of life that the houses these planets fall in rule. There's also something with Mars opposite Saturn that I think there's with Mars Saturn aspects, there's this like real determination to get your way because Mars does want to get its way and Saturn is like, well, I'm right. So with Mars opposite Saturn, I think that Mars opposite Saturn is used to not getting its way. However, it learns or knows or adapts and figures out how to navigate into not getting its way, but still finding something in that to make it worthwhile, or finding some way to make it work for itself. And if it doesn't, it's going to be a real shithead and horrible to work with. But anyways, and speaking of, this aspect hates wasting time. Any Mars Saturn does. But I think Mars opposite Saturn tends to waste a lot of time on just being productive on the wrong things. Also, something that I feel like is like a little anecdote in my life. Like I'm trying to bring in like more lighthearted anecdotes because yes, this is like a serious aspect, but sometimes it does just play out in little ways. I grew up around a lot of very athletic girls. They all did some kind of sport or something of some kind or multiple things or whatever it was. And I grew up with Mars in the 4th house, so I always thought that kind of made sense. And they would also like always play basketball and they'd always play horse. And it took me not days, not months, but years to make my first basket in basketball, just to make one. But I would still play horse. I would just get HORSE and then be out. But it's like, well, I will eventually figure it out. It'll just take me a really long time. And I do think there also is something that comes along with humiliation with this energy. And I grew up with a lot of people with Mars opposite Saturn, and they have told me of, I actually knew somebody with first house Mars, 7th house Saturn opposition in Virgo and Pisces. Oh my God. I mean, I barely knew this person, but they had an accident in like middle school that was not of middle school age, and it was like so humiliating. They had to go to a different school for the rest of their life, and it was like a benchmark thing, and that was very like first house Virgo to me. And then like Pisces Saturn, like avoid it forever, you know what I mean? So there is something I think to humiliation that can come in different ways. Like my Saturn was in Aries, so it would make sense if that humiliation came from sports, which was kind of true. I was such a Mars in Libra. So another hallmark, true hallmark of this lovely, little aspect, no. Another hallmark of this aspect is sexual repression and frustration, and repression of anger and frustration, the frustration that comes with repressing your anger. Really fun. Mars wants to go, right? And Saturn wants to pause and stop and think and reflect and take caution. So that kind of results in a pretty awkward, clumsy energy. I actually think along with like Venus-Mars square or opposition, this is another one of those that can be clumsy. I think that Mars trine and Mars, especially Mars trine Saturn, I think would actually have really good balance and a center of gravity. And I think that Mars opposite Saturn, well, I have both. I have both fantastic balance, but I also have no like object permanence, and I'm very clumsy. I guess that's the opposition, right? Both are true and both are false. This is such a goofy way to put it, but like, let's say we want an expression of our anger that's like nice and fluid and kind of even. With Mars trine Saturn or sextile Saturn, it's like, okay, now we have like a little bit of like a siphon. So that anger has to go through this like siphon. So it kind of takes like longer to go out, but it's still uniformed, and it's still like, smoothed out, and the creases and the edges are smoothed out, right? Basically with Mars opposite Saturn, it's like there's like a garage door, and that is Saturn, and the garage door closes, and then like all the Mars energy backs up, and it backs up and it backs up until the pressure builds, and it's released, and it's like, and then like, especially if it's like on a water sign too, like the floodgates just open, It just depends on like, I guess what Mars, I guess if it's like air, fire, or like I always say I feel like I fill up with hot air is what I always say it feels like, but it would make sense if like with a water Mars, like the floodgates open. Maybe with the Earth Mars, your IBS problems dissipate. It really does feel like though you have to squish down any of your innate anger impulses or just any of your innate impulses. It feels like you always want to act at the wrong time, wrong place, right? Because that's Saturn, wrong time, wrong place. So it feels like because it's oppositions, and because it's an opposition, it feels like whenever you want to act, whenever you want to get upset, whenever you want to confront, it is the wrong time, wrong place. And whenever you're given that option or that opportunity to confront or go after something is when you don't want to for some reason or another or whatever it may be. I've noticed like my timing with my anger is always just the worst. Like I have the worst timing. It can also be like stopping exertions of energy or rushing decisions that need to be made cautious and carefully, right? Like it's that flip-flop. You know, especially like sexual repression is huge. This can a lot of times come from an outer authority. This aspect is very, very common to have with like especially a harsh Mars-Pluto aspect or something along those veins, maybe Mars-Chiron aspect. And with those aspects, if you have like Mars square Pluto, Mars opposite Pluto, Mars square Chiron, Mars conjunct Chiron, Lord knows, something like that. You know, that is when I think religious sexual repression comes in. I don't know if I would innately say that Mars opposite Saturn is religious. And maybe even like Neptune can come into play with that. Jupiter can come into play with that when it is more like that. But it can be something that shows like you were indoctrinated with that and then you repressed it. Does that make sense? Not everybody that has that sexual repression indoctrination then is repressive in their sexuality. And not everybody that's repressive in their sexuality got some kind of religious indoctrination, but you know, a lot of times those two go hand in hand. And when I read this chart in a lot of people, I see a lot of it. It's so common to see in charts that have strong indicators of religious trauma. So I just kind of wanted to add that in, that this is one of those like religious trauma indicators if accompanied by some other more ardent indicators like Saturn in the 8th or Mars, Pluto. There's so many, I could go on. But anyways, you just feel like for some reason or another, you cannot express your anger freely. You cannot explore or express your sexuality freely. You know, it depends on what your natal Mars sign is, the house placements, the flavor of your Mars, the other aspects, as to whether or not you are sexually vicarious or open or not. But it's like, no matter if you are or not, you're going to be repressed. So some people might be very like inhibiting their sexual energy, but that's how their natal Mars is anyways. And this energy just kind of reaffirms that. They do that. Or they might have a really expressive Mars that wants to really put itself out there and be sexually free or whatever it is. But then, you know, that Saturn and the outside circumstances or inner things that were taught to them or convictions or whatever is repressing them, right? Basically what I'm trying to say is that this aspect just shows sexual repression, but what kind, where, and how it got there, and if you want it to be there, and how much, you know, whatever it is, like all those other things are completely up to the other aspects of the birth chart, okay? And also something about Mars opposite Saturn is that this is like the stereotype of it, because again, a lot of people in my year had this, and I saw this happen to a lot of people in my year, where, you know, there'll be girls that have a lot of sex and are very sexually free and open, and people don't care. They're just like, yeah, that's who they are, whatever. But then the girl that is like has sex with one person or has sex once, but they have Mars opposite Saturn, they're going to be the one that's branded the whore. They're going to be the one that's branded the slut. They're going to be the one that's chastised for it or shamed for it, or, you know, it's going to be stopped, right? Or like I've had people like physically stop. This is ridiculous, maybe too much, but I've had people stop sexual encounters in mine before and be like, stop! The most literal encounter of Saturn is like, I'm not even doing anything wrong. You know, and obviously anger goes the same way, right? That repression of anger. If you express your anger even just a little bit, people are like, you're so angry, you're the most angry person in the world, which sometimes we can be. Right, speaking of, because anger repression, it can build and build and build, right? And then it can easily turn into resentment and bitterness after a long period of time, right? Saturn keeps it in, but with an opposition, it keeps it in times that it shouldn't, and for too long, and in ways that it shouldn't, and doesn't take action, or takes too quick of action, or takes the wrong action, right? Or judges itself like that. And anyways, but because Mars opposite Saturn does not nip things in the bud, or like express your frustrations and stop it at the tip of something. You know, Mars opposite Saturn can really allow things that can be a small problem to fester into a bigger problem, because I think also the tactics that are taken to deal with it are usually sometimes counterproductive. In a weird way. I feel like, no, I'm not trying to be all doomsday with this aspect. I will say, okay, I feel like I need to counteract it with something positive now. So this is one of the bigger, harsher aspects, right? But a positive about this aspect is that I do think this aspect has some level of integrity and a lot of self-control, self-discipline, and self-restraint. The reason why I think this aspect adds a lot of integrity to the personality is because if you need to do something the hard and right way, Mars opposite Saturn is not afraid of doing that. It won't fear that stuff. It's hard to get it to flinch in at least in like circumstances, physical circumstances, right? So that's, you know, it still has that Mars Saturn touch to it, even though it's a little bit funked up, right? But going back to the anger, so it's fair. I think a big thing is that no matter what houses you have this energy in, I do think that it is bad for your health to restrain so much anger. And so even though this aspect isn't innately connected with health, I think with, you know, with built up anger and resentment and like that festering in your body, it can show up as illnesses or displaced energy in the body. And when people talk about this aspect, they'll say you should do some kind of hobby, have some kind of exertion of energy, or like things like, I don't know, like martial arts or fighting, like, you know, in more contained ways is really good for this expression. And I actually would probably have to agree. And I've actually also found that my body likes the right amount of physical activity. Like I've always had this knee issue, and you'd think that, oh, if the knee issue acts up, you have to rest it. But I've always thought it was a very Mars opposite Saturn thing, where it's like you need to find that balance where if I rest it too much, it gets upset because I'm not using it. But if I use it too much, it gets upset because I'm like depending on it too much or something. So I've always thought that was very Mars opposite Saturn, because I have to use it the appropriate amount. I have to walk and like move about during the day an appropriate amount, you know, and knees and bones is very Saturn. And that's like representative of the whole, right? It's all about finding the balance between patience and initiative. Another big thing that I kind of have already touched on is with Mars opposite Saturn is there's really big blocks sexually. The one thing that I do think that this has in common with Moon opposite Mars is that initial, especially when you're young, initial discomfort in your body and in your own like physicality and your own sexuality. It's in different ways, right? But it's like you do have to go through a period, if you want to overcome it, of learning to be comfortable in your body and learning to be comfortable expressing yourself sexually and your sexuality, and still being comfortable with it despite people belittling you or incorrectly judging you or whatever blocks get in your way. But there's also just like in sex, like very casually even, it can feel like there are these blocks. Like it's always like wrong time, wrong place with people, or external circumstances are getting in the way of you having fun-free sex, or maybe it's always like work conflicts, especially with Saturn coming in. You know, when one person's available, the other one's not available, and the other one's in a relationship, or, you know, it can just feel like that. Or there can also be a lot of sexual rejection. I think that's incredibly common, because I do think maybe there can be themes of sexual humiliation potentially. So I think that if your Mars is in a public house, this can especially happen publicly, you know? Something that I will say actually a positive of this aspect is that I think this aspect is less likely to do things sexually it doesn't want to do. I actually think it's more likely to not do the things sexually it wants to do. And that's where that self-control and self-restraint comes in. It tends to be, I mean, maybe especially because when around my year it was in Libra, but I do think Mars opposite Saturn makes it so like these people are less likely to go after what they want and who they want than they are to, you know, impede upon somebody. But sometimes I guess if it depends, if that Mars is like really, I would say, I mean, I guess it all depends, right? If that Mars is like unhinged in Aries in the first house, opposite Saturn in the seventh house, this can be somebody that really overly pushes themselves onto somebody else and doesn't understand the other person's boundaries, right? So in some ways, this is the energy of like, you know, when you are like, I work best under crunch time, or like, give, you know that saying, like, give the person with 100 things to do the other thing to do, or whatever, you know? That's kind of like Mars opposite Saturn. Like, they're already doing so much that you add something else to their plate and they'll get it done, you know, they'll make sure to get it done more than the person that's not doing anything and has all the time. You can really achieve insurmountable things. You can work really impressively under harsh circumstances. And since we were talking about that energy of like it builds up until it explodes, something that I think can be very common is some kind of inappropriate expression of anger. Now I have meltdowns, and I think this aspect is a big reason as to why, because again, you hold it and you hold it until right? Not everybody's look like that, right? I'm sure a lot of other people's explosion of anger looks very different, especially depending on what sign you have. I think I actually wrote out some examples, right? Like, yes, I said it can look like Aries, for example, which is just that total classic anger explosion, which is like a meltdown, like I said, that I feel like I experience. Or it might look like Taurus, which is just this like, it's not this external expression of anger, but all of a sudden you sink your heels so deep into something that seems so, you know, small and insignificant, but yet you will die on that hill, right? That can be your own version of like a meltdown, you know. Or let's say it's in Pisces, where you get so emotionally lost in your anger, you're just crying and so much all the time that you can't focus, you can't do anything else because you're just so emotionally distraught, you know? So it doesn't have to always look like this classic, you know, it is Mars, but it doesn't have to look like this classic like, you know, bang your head against the wall kind of thing. It can look like different, but there will be some kind of inappropriate, for lack of a better word, release that inevitably comes if you hold it in and you don't find some even outlet for it. Even though, like I said, there can be this real self-restrictive, self-controlled, self-contained energy, it can also flip-flop the other way because it's an opposition. And there can be all of a sudden this too impulsive thing where you don't think and you just act out of your anger and explode out of nowhere. And this is also what creates a person that's very hard to live with. It creates a very unpredictable person. It creates a little bit of a hazard sometimes, even depending on what signs or houses it's in. Another thing is I think you're constantly locked in fight or flight mode. You know, that's like Mars, Saturn. It's like one or the other, and it's hard. You need to find that balance. Another big thing with this aspect is, with any Mars-Saturn aspect, is there is a really intense ambition and an intense energy. However, as I'm sure you figured out, however, with the opposition, it can be a little misplaced, displaced, misdirected, get lost along the way, right? It is very determined though. Now, I would say Mars, Saturn, Mars, Capricorn, Mars square Saturn even maybe is like that aspect that's like, I'm not a quitter. I think that Mars opposite Saturn can be more of a quitter, but not without like a long time first. But I do think that because Mars opposite Saturn can go hand in hand with defeat and humiliation and setbacks, there can be some times where Mars opposite Saturn has to put the, you know, throw in the towel and accept defeat. And the more graciously they do it, the better that they'll be redeemed, but just depends on the rest of the aspects. And because of that, it can be easy to question. I do think that Mars opposite Saturn has more of a tendency, and money Mars Saturn aspect has more of a tendency to find something and fixate on that goal, which is a nice thing about Mars Saturn. But with Mars opposite Saturn, you can fixate on one goal, but then do the opposite action, right? Like my goal is to, let me try and think of an example. My goal is to, this is a weird example. My goal is to eat healthy and work out every day, but yet my job is to review junk food. So every day I'm going out and I'm eating junk food, but yet I'm setting all these goals to lose weight, and I'm trying to talk to a nutritionist and take all these take all these healthy, you know, supplements. But yet no matter what, every day I have to review the new Pizza Hut or McDonald's item and do a mukbang on it, right? Like, it's kind of like, okay, so why are your actions in complete direct opposition to your goal? So you got to get those two lined up, guys. This aspect can be obviously very prone to overworking and burnout. However, I will say out of all of the harsh Mars aspects, I have the most faith in harsh Mars-Saturn aspects into being able to be productive and get things done. Most harsh Mars aspects obstruct productivity. And yes, Mars-Saturn literally obstructs productivity, but I really do think that Mars-Saturn aspects, as much as they obstruct productivity, they just in the same vein create somebody that is willing to push through that and continue forward through whatever's, in their way. I actually do think that this is one of those aspects where you'd think Mars opposite or something Saturn, oh no, this is going to create a bad worker. It creates maybe somebody that does poorly with authority, which we'll talk about in a second, but it doesn't create somebody that's like not productive. It just creates somebody that's like, you might need to make sure that you're focusing their energy in the best way that you can. Like I think this is advice for somebody if like you're an employee or a child with Mars opposite Saturn is, they have a lot of energy and they can be very productive, but make sure that you are directing that productivity in a way that is the most beneficial to the whole picture, that is the most beneficial for them, for you, for the greater, task at hand, because, like I said, there can be that hamster wheel. So you want to make sure that you're giving them good direction, And when you do go through those periods of extreme discouragement or you have to quit or move on, you need to accept that failure. It's one of those like pick yourself up by your bootstrap aspects. And unfortunately, I know that phrase sucks, but I just like using it. I think it's funny to use ironically, but it's one of those things where I've used it so much ironically that it's kind of become unironic. Anyways, pick yourself up by your bootstraps aspect and grow from it, right? It's kind of like one of those like, well, it's a dog eat dog world aspects, There's this like really high standard that also all Mars Saturn aspects hold themselves to. With Mars opposite Saturn, sometimes it can be insurmountably high, and maybe if it's like a really shitty week Saturn, maybe it's insurmountably low. I don't know. It can just be off standards, I guess I should say. When they do focus and knuckle down on something, I do also think it can be really intense and intimidating and overbearing, and they can really want other people to show the same dedication and excitement and intensity. And when they won't, I do think sometimes instead of like leaving them alone because it's the opposition, they can get really like, again, angry, upset, bitter, resentful about it, if that makes sense. They're like, I'm always doing the most work. I'm always picking up all the slack. And again, that's why it can create like a really just shitty personality to be around and live around. And again, it's for the opposite reason that you would think. It's not because they're not doing the dishes. It's because they are doing the dishes that creates the shitty personality. Does that make sense? That's like the best way I can put it. I mean, that's like a 6th house Virgo example, but you know what I mean. Not everybody with this aspect is going to do the dishes, but I think actually with this aspect, they're more likely to handle it than they aren't, if I'm being honest. Okay, so the big one of my favorite parts of a big part of this aspect, as I've kind of mentioned, is authority issues. Obviously, because it's an opposition to Saturn. And what's on the other side of that? The very argumentative Mars, right? So if Saturn is the authority, and then the authority is being opposed by Mars, what I say, what I want, what I do, what I feel, like you're just very opposing to authority naturally, right? And then let's say maybe even if it's the other way around, if you're an authority, you can be very argumentative to others. You can be very stubborn and very like, this is how I'm going to do it. It's my way or the highway kind of energy. I think I mentioned even in my notes, like this is an energy that would fire a friend, especially if it's like a really harsh, intense energy. Maybe they haven't learned some of their lessons. Definitely when I was younger, I don't know if I would fire a friend, like I wouldn't fire a best friend, but yes, definitely when I was younger, if it was just like a friend or an acquaintance or like someone I knew, but if I was like, well, yeah, if they're not, I was so autistic. I was like, yeah, if they weren't performing to their duties and if they weren't doing what they needed to do, then yeah, I mean, I remain their friend, but I would 100% fire them, was like the mentality that I had. And maybe you won't be as intense with it, But I do think if you need somebody to fire a friend, definitely getting, or somebody that they know, or like fire the personality hire that nobody wants to fire, I'd probably get a Mars opposite Saturn to do it for sure. But definitely like you need somebody to go in there with them because they might just be a little too mean and too rude. So get like them to somebody as like a checks and balances. Get a little good cop, bad cop going in. No, just kidding. Okay, I don't even know. This isn't even like a made up situation. I don't know. The point of it was authority issues. So yeah. Harsh aspects, any harsh aspects to any combination of Mars, Saturn, Pluto represent authority issues of different sorts and flavors. You know, any one of those planets to any one of those planets in harsh aspect. And then the houses that those planets sit in show the areas of life or area of life that these authoritative presences will rain down on you. For example, you know, if you have one of these energies in the 8th house, then the IRS will become the authoritative form that rains down on you potentially. If you have one of these planets in the 11th house, then public outcry and the news might be the thing that rains down on you, right? Like you might publicly get humiliated or something. With Mars opposite Saturn, anytime you try to take bold action, especially in the areas of that house or in the way of your Mars sign especially, an authoritative presence represented by Saturn will get in the way of your ease of expression, right? It's just like, you know what this aspect is? It's just like one giant cock block. You know what I mean? In sex, yes, but just in general too. It just feels like the world is just always cock blocking you in every way, form, and shape, and it's just like really frustrating. I also, and this might be my Cancer rising, but I've noticed this with like friends that I have with Mars opposite Saturn. Like they'll tell me stories and I'll be like I'll feel the same way about it, okay? But I do feel like people are more likely to get angry or mad at somebody with Mars opposite Saturn over things other people wouldn't get such backlash over, especially because the expectations of the Mars opposite Saturn person are different and usually higher, or usually stricter, or the leash is tighter, you know? And also Mars opposite Saturn is definitely more likely to go against authority figures in that area of that house, even if it's like the 3rd house. Like maybe you have a sibling that has more authority over you and they might represent an authority and you might kind of rebel against them or rebel against the norm or something in that way, right? This is incredibly common in the father as well. I do think that this is very common to have a father that would be very upset at you or angry at you over things that maybe didn't matter in the context of the whole, or maybe that didn't matter in your life in the long run. I remember like things that my dad, that would basically like end the world, shatter and crack the earth in my family growing up, was if I spilled a cup of water. That was like the biggest deal in the entire world. And I remember always being like, I get that it's annoying that I spilt a cup of water. Like, I'm not saying that I defended it. And it's also very clumsy too. I would always clean it up immediately. It's not like the glass would shatter. I would just sometimes like be like, wah! And then I'd like spill water a little bit. It was just very commonplace. And that was like, that would start World War III. That was like I did dishonor to the family. You know what I mean? Where it's just kind of like, I just don't feel like getting so upset about this is really productive, right? It's Saturn. It's like, does this really matter in the grand scheme of things, you know? Also, I remember feeling like my dad had a very tight line on me. So yeah, sometimes it can feel like the punishment does not fit the crime. I think also with this aspect, right? You also might have been expected to have a lot of self-control, self-discipline, and common sense when it came to action from a very young age. I think there can be this back and forth between feelings of inadequacy, Saturn, and feelings of the most intense, boundless confidence, Mars, right? Sometimes you're filled with humility and you're very humble, while other times you're being humiliated and embarrassed, while other times you're the one doing the humiliating and embarrassing others. Like, all are true, unfortunately. I think this is a very antisocial aspect. Like, I really do. Like, I think it's very... What I mean by antisocial is not that it doesn't want friends, but it's just like the antithesis of an aspect that plays well with others. like it's antisocial, like that. Just, you know what I mean? It can come out as very harsh and defensive in a person, because they will automatically assume blocks will come and prepare needlessly and attack preemptively, for sure. These people have a lot of authority issues because they never just give, especially if has like Aquarius energy around it too. But anyways, these people do not just give out respect just because, and Scorpio too, now that I think about it. Anyways, these people do not just give out respect just because. They do not have much patience for weakness in themselves or other people. Especially they do not have patience for weaponized incompetence and weakness that come from people that are able-bodied and capable but give up or do not try. They can be really unyielding and unbending and unforgiving and unempathetic in those kinds of situations, in my opinion, because they feel like the world is that way towards them too. That's what I said. It can be that kind of mentality of like, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, kind of thing. The thing with giving respect to authority, like it's earned. So big thing with me is like, I used to feel like teachers had to prove themselves to me first. Deadass. I'm just going to be totally honest. Like even in like 1st or 2nd grade, like it didn't matter. Like, but I felt like in order for me to treat you well as a student, you had to, you had to show me that you were there for a reason, that you were good at what you did, and that you were smarter than me, and that you were more capable than me, and that I could trust you with teaching me, and that I could trust the advice that you'd give me, and that I could trust the things that you'd teach me. Like I won't just accept what you're teaching to me as fact and true just because, you know, you're standing up there. Like let me, like you got to back up what you say first. And so I would have quite the attitude with authority. But again, if I liked the teacher and they earned my respect, I would be a fantastic student. Like I really would be. And I think that a lot of Mars opposite Saturn people probably have a teacher or two that they really feel like earned their respect, and they really wanted to earn the other teacher's respect, and you know, feel proud and, you know, have pride in them and their teacher, and the teacher have pride in the kid. You know what I mean? The teacher have pride in the student, all that stuff. This energy doesn't take orders well. And honestly, I don't think it gives them well either. And I know that people will disagree with me in the comments. I know there will be so many people maybe with Mars opposite Saturn that will be like, I'm great at giving orders, I'm a boss and everyone loves me. I think that I work best when I just give myself orders. I think I work best when the only person I annoy is myself. Yeah, I just don't think that this energy innately does well with teamwork, and does not really work well with others. Cooperation can be triggering for the person, and it can feel silencing. And to other people, they will either come across like standoffish and like distant and just want to do their own thing, or they'll come off overly impeding on the project. Like this is the kind of energy that either does the whole group project, or a lot of times I would ask to opt to just do my own thing. This is very like work harder, not smarter. A lot of times in group projects, if I could opt to do my own thing and just do all the work, that was the route that I was more likely to take, which is just so Mars opposite Saturn. And honestly, whenever I did that, it was probably easier for me. There is a little bit more of a natural combativeness that the Mars opposite Saturn person might even not really realize they have, or might very likely be in denial that they have. Might be like, oh, well, I was just asking questions, or I was just giving my perspective, or I was just letting you know what I've learned, or the lessons that I saw. But it can definitely come across, and depending on what signs you have it in, is like the energy of what it'll come across, but it can definitely come across a lot more combative than you mean for it to be. And sometimes you might be arguing with somebody and it might come across less combative than you mean to. I don't know. But there is, like I said, this demanding, harsh, authoritative, unmoving, yet still trepidatious and like back and forth, you know, kind of personality. And it makes somebody really hard to live with. In the very least, it makes them hard to live with, because I do think this aspect adds more drama to somebody's life. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean social drama, like we think of drama, gossip, love triangles. That's not necessarily this aspect. If that's in your life, that's going to be because of other aspects. Mars opposite Saturn usually inhibits that kind of stuff more than anything, and like stops you from the experiences rather than gives you more experiences, if that makes sense. But it adds the kind of drama that is this, like, it's more about this daily taxing, monotonous drama, right? Like I said, you have to drive to 3 ATMs to get money out instead of just walk to the neighborhood ATM like most people. You know what I mean? It kind of just, it's like, once, you know, somebody with Mars opposite Saturn comes around your life, or you're living with somebody with this aspect, it can feel like you just get swept up in it all and everything is like 10 times harder, right? Like you try to help them and there's 10 new things that come in your way. They try to help you and you're like, this probably would have been easier if I just did it myself, you know? Even if that's not their fault, even if it is their fault, right? You know, plus they're going to be more spontaneously argumentative personalities, right? All of a sudden they're angry and they're upset and they're mad at you and you don't understand why, you don't know where it's coming from, and it just doesn't really make any sense. And like I said, they have this unexpected unpredictability to them. With Saturn aspects, this is usually a stabilizing energy, but with it opposite to Mars, it adds this impulsiveness to action every now and then, and it can make it like people can view you as a little bit more spontaneous in your actions and your pursuits. You can be a little more unhinged with this aspect. You can be more unapologetic when you do take action, especially if you take action that offends people. You can be more unapologetic in it, and in that way you can be more unpredictable, because the Mars opposite Saturn person will defy authority and will defy rules sometimes, not all the time, right? So somebody that's this always rule breaker, there's some predictability there. You know how they're going to respond. Somebody that always follows the rules, you know how they're always going to respond. Somebody that follows some, doesn't follow others, sometimes does well with orders, sometimes talks a lot, sometimes shuts up and listens. You don't know what, you know, maybe you don't know what discipline side of them you're gonna get, you know? They can be unmanageable. You know, Mars opposite Saturn, it's unmanageable. And like I said, it's antisocial. So there's a lack of tact to their demeanor as well, because their actions are clumsy and displaced, you know, and their energy is displaced a lot of times. You know, and because there's also this lack of tact that can sometimes come from Saturn and Mars wanting to get to their end destination in the fastest, most perfect, most efficient way, you know, from point A to point B, that it can kind of railway through things and have a lack of tact as well. Sometimes they can be too uptight and go so strictly by the manners that you don't want them around because they're such a shrewd and a prude, you know? And then sometimes they're just so defiant and rebellious that you don't want them around. And it just depends, and both can be true for the same person with Mars opposite Saturn. So even though this is a very like hyper contained aspect, when it's unhealthy, it can come out in more unmanageable, unpredictable ways. Now, when mastered, this can be like Mars in Capricorn in its best, you know, in its best way. It can be very proficient. It can, you know, learn from its challenges and learn from its setbacks. It can have a lot of self-discipline and self-competency and integrity. And it can, you know, go by its own rules and live by its own set of morals, but still have a very high moral compass. I don't know if I would say I like the aspect, but I am maybe not as scared of this double malefic aspect, maybe as I should be, or maybe as I am some other super malefic aspects, just because I do think that more than anything, this aspect promises a higher likelihood of long-term rewards and it paying off in the grand scheme of things. There's more of a likelihood of that than it will end in like complete and utter like self-succumtion and like disaster, like maybe like a harsh Neptune aspect can really falter and end in. So I do think maybe there's a little bit of a rainbow at the end of the tunnel with this aspect, more than some other double malefic aspects, but it is definitely very challenging and a big one for a reason. But yes, that is my whole video about Mars opposite Saturn. Even though this is a very, very long video, I'm sure I still missed out on some stuff, or maybe didn't explain myself the most perfect way or something, who knows. But yeah, please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments about this aspect. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Leave your aspect requests down in the comments. I have an astrology TikTok at shaina.emily. I have an astrology YouTube, shainaemily.com. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Again, my uploads will be a little bit more unpredictable. Hey, Mars opposite Saturn, more unpredictable than normal. I'm in one of those more erratic times than I am in one of those hyper-structured times at the moment, right? But, you know, gotta flow through it. So there'll still be uploads. They'll just not be as consistent as they normally are when they are once a week on Wednesday, but they'll still be coming. So yeah, don't forget to vote on my aspect poll if you haven't. All that stuff, yada, yada, yada. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and I wish you nothing but the best in your future endeavors. Your future astrology endeavors. I don't know. Okay. All right. Bye.